Welcome to another episode of She Unleashed. She Unleashed is, of course, brought to you by Pumzajani, the intention of which is to bring you women from across the globe who are doing amazing things. Women have been at the center of the discussion where we said when she's unleashed, she becomes economically powerful, she becomes the nurturer, she builds nations. And of course, we have an amazing guest who speaks right into that today. You will be in awe of the conversations that we always have with Dr. Pauline. Dr. Pauline was part of our first season, and she brings a different perspective to the dynamics of gender, where she says we need both genders. Dr. Pauline, welcome on board, and it's such a pleasure to have you.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here, and I want to bring some new ideas to you. So I brought my map along with me, but it's amazing what's happened in the last couple of years, isn't it?
In fact, I wanted to talk to you about that. There's been a lot of changes in your title. You've been conquering the world. I've been seeing quite a few things. You're an author. You are recently a president of the USPC FC, and you'll tell us a little bit about that. And you also are the chairperson of the G100, the Positive Masculinity. You run an academic institution on entrepreneurship. You are doing a lot of things with Africa. So tell me a little bit about the presidency that comes into effect today.
Well, it's the president of the Rotary Club of Global Impact. Yeah. And this is part of Rotary International, which, as hopefully everybody knows, this is a worldwide organization that serves causes everywhere in the world. And I have the honor to be the president of the Rotary Club of Global Impact, which is a global club. And so it's not local. I'm based in Las Vegas. The club was formed in North Carolina, which is on the East Coast of America. And we have members across the world, literally. And so we work in a very different way. And I love that because I'm a British woman, but I live in America. I see myself as a global citizen. I have spent 4 years in Malaysia, working and living there. I'm working with female entrepreneurs there and men as well. And I'm very passionate that we understand the magic and the beauty of the world. And we actually get together, men and women of all cultures, all preferences, all diversities, because we have some serious economic and social issues to deal with.
That's fantastic. You know, the most amazing thing about you is you are very versatile. You change to the times. You move with the times. You're not stuck. And I know that when we themed what you do in the past, we themed it as conversations. And now I see you have now branded into now more leadership and saying cracking the leadership code. I think in essence, there's nothing that has changed in the body of the work, but it's more directed now towards a specific angle. Maybe tell me a little bit about your work around positive masculinity, and then cracking the leadership code.
Absolutely. And what's really interesting, and you see that word positive masculinity, the notion of positive masculinity and positive femininity, and in fact, positivity, is really what we're focused on, because we unfortunately have a toxic world. And we know that there's abuse, there's harassment, there's gender-based violence, but there is also, insidious behavior in the boardrooms, in the business world. And so using the nature of archetypes, which I'll explain a little more, using the archetypes is looking at where are the blocks, where are the stuck points, what can we crack to open up to humanity, if you like. So cracking the code, cracking the leadership code, cracking the life code, cracking the gender code, it's almost opening it up. And I started thinking last year about how do we move away from fighting for equality, not losing equality, but not fighting for it, because fighting for something is damaging, so it's toxic. So how about we enjoy the power of authentic harmony. So it means we're moving together, we're moving towards the harmony. And I have to say, when I was invited to run the G100 Positive Masculinity group, I thought, gosh, I never actually put those two words together. I mean, that's where you have to be agile and flexible, is to welcome that. And I have to assure you that when I mentioned positive masculinity to men, there was a very, very good response. And I always look for good responses, because good responses move us away from toxic. So then I thought, right, how about the power of authentic harmony and saying goodbye to equality, hello, harmony? And again, I got very good responses from men and from women. And my passion is that we discover how we can all be together on a map together. So allowing for differences, allowing for choices, allowing for the uniqueness of being a human being. And of course, there are similarities about who we are as human beings. I often ask myself, when somebody says, oh, I don't want to be on your map, I say, but you're breathing. So as a human being, if we get into a toxic situation, we may blame the other party. But the challenge is to embrace the situation and create the conversation that makes a difference. So the conversation is sitting in the middle of the people who are talking. So if we crack the code, and by that I mean that, if you like, the past code or the traditional code, which says, I'm in charge. If I'm right, you're wrong. And that means we go my way. Now, that might be any of the characters on this map, but unfortunately, it often is what we might consider the masculine male ruler who has ruled the world with a sword. And if we look historically, we can understand some of those reasons. The man was out there to provide, to protect. Women were at home to have babies. And we're talking centuries ago. But indeed, it's still like that now. So I see that if we can crack the code together and create a language of harmony, of compassion, of respect, trust, and also a language of productivity and creativity and innovation, that's where we get a very vibrant output. So when we talk about authentic harmony, it's not wishy-washy. It's actually a principle of life that says, if you can respect who I am as a woman, and I can respect who you are as a man, I respect you as an older person, as a younger person, as a Black person, a white person, whatever it is, any preference, we actually get into what we call magical conversations, which are conversations without judgment.
I hear you, Dr. Pauline, but tell me, what is the criticism you receive from the pro-feminism movement? Because there's almost the belief that, how do we get into harmony when men are not ready to engage us positively?
Well, this is the wonderful challenge of the world. And that's why I say, I think if we move away from fighting for it to placing a win. So one of the things that men want, they want to know how to win. I think women have now got that sort of competitive edge too, because many, many women have run businesses, more and more women-owned business, funding for women. But we need to understand that we can come together. So I believe it's looking for what is the good value for men working in a new map with women that suits the current era. And I think that is the other important thing. We've been through a world pandemic. We've been through so many economic changes that are still going on. And we don't know where this is going to end, but we know that we also have AI coming in. We have a whole new, hybrid working in so many ways that we need to know ourselves. Because I believe if we don't address this now, we're in danger of falling into the pit of control. So we may get controlled by AI. We may get controlled by somebody saying, well, I can't deal with you. So,
actually, I think that may be a good phase we're getting into, because normally when we have to unite against something, that's where you see shifts happening. Because I think what we find is the difficulty as women is when you're standing in a position of privilege, it's so difficult for
Yes.
you to see the other side of the coin. And I think you raise valid points. You raise the points that we're getting into a different phase. We fought. And it is
Yes.
through that fight that we even have women who have some form of economic power now, and they're competitive. They've had access to leadership roles because they fought. But you are saying now we're getting into a new season where other factors are starting to be a challenge for humanity and requires us to be all around the table and find a way that is harmonic for us to work together. So tell me a little bit about the archetypes and how do you introduce the archetypes in a corporate setting, and how is the receptivity like from the different players around the room?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because the ability for people to recognize who they are
Mm-hmm.
is the degree to which we can understand the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
Because, if we said the world has got into a bad place and it's men's problem or it's men's fault, we're on a hiding to nothing, even though potentially some of the traumas have come from there. I believe it's almost, I say to people, if you started with a blank sheet, what would you design the world? How would you create the world? You would still want to be creative and productive and watching changing markets. As I say, the introduction of AI increasingly changing everything. And also looking at people's fragility, that we are fragile.
Mm-hmm.
And if we've done something for 30, 40, 50 years, and somebody comes along and says, well, actually, you're going to do it totally differently.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge for some people.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're looking at, and just to explain this, we're looking at fundamental natural behavioral essence. So, for instance, if we look at being a male or a female, so the male are on this side of the map, the females on the other side. There is a functionality that we have as biological beings in the way we lead our lives. And as we say, if you layer in there the historical nature that men designed the world of business and society to be the providers, and women the protected species, over the last 100 years, of course, that's changed. But essentially, men are very task focused. They are very linear, and essentially, a lot of their language is either or. Yes, no. What are we going to do? When are we going to do it? And women came along with, you see on the other side, very lots and lots of lines. Women came along with a very menstrual cycle, yes, but emotional template, very much about relationships. But it didn't deny that they were good business people. And I think that's where the conversation about business and life, I always say, when women came into business, they brought life with them, because they had to consider the children or the parents or their social network. You have to turn that to an advantage. So one of the reasons I like to focus on the person I call the ruler there, because he's the masculine male. He's the decision maker, bullet point. When are we going to do it? When are we going to do it? I need it now. And they have a functionality which is directiveness. And we need that in our world. So it's not denying their character. And what I know in my experience is that most rulers know they're rulers. They don't quit. And one of the things is that the other man, which you can see there called the philosopher, is a male. He still does those task things, but he's very theoretical. He's looking at why. So you hear him say, I lead by asking people why they're here. I lead by asking people, why do you need to do this? And so he complements the ruler. And in my experience as well with the corporate world, the ruler and the philosopher make a very good business relationship. You look at Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Steve Jobs was very creative, very single-minded ruler, and Wozniak was the detailed theory man to make it work. So when we look at women, women are fundamentally different. We bring relational energy to work, which is needed in a world where we care about our customers and we care about each other. It doesn't mean to say men can't do relationships, but we do them in different ways. So the women are going, and this and this and this. We can do this and this and this and this and this. So you're bringing in what you might call flow, with task and then flow. And these two elements are really needed now, especially with AI coming in and hybrid working and home working. Everything is more fluid. Everything is more personal, really. And the issue for women, and this is where it's interesting, is women, I believe, and as a woman, and you as a woman, we need to step into our power as women, not in an aggressive control power, but in saying to men, actually, we're half of the world and we have a lot of talent. How about using it?
I liked when you brought examples, because then for someone who's hearing it for the first time, they had an aha moment, and then you could relate, okay, Steve Jobs in my context is this kind of a leader, and a philosopher is that kind of a leader. So when you present these archetypes, are men readily knowing where they fit in, or are the people who are confused whether they're philosophers or rulers?
Yeah. What's interesting, we learn about other people by listening to their words. I'll always say, our greatest journey in life is learning about ourselves. But the second most interesting superpower you can have is to understand people who are not like you. So listen to their words. So you will find that the ruler says, well, I run a business by telling people what to do. Whereas the philosopher might say, why are we here? I always quote Nelson Mandela as a philosopher. So the philosopher is a very strong, Desmond Tutu, Dalai Lama. It's a very thinking people style as opposed to action style. So when we look at the words people use, and you can see these key words here, the magician and the sovereign differ because they're both women, but the magician is in her head a lot of the time. Obviously, she's still a woman, a female, but she's in her head. She will tend to say, what's going on here? What can we do next? What's happening now? Because she's in her head creating lots of ideas. The sovereign tends to be a who person. Who's here with me? Who can I help? Who's in my territory? And she's a feminine female archetype, which means that she nurtures. So the magician is also a nurturer. Women are all nurturers, but there's a subtle difference. And the key to this is knowing that we need each other.
Tell me about an example of a magician that we know about, as well as an example of a sovereign that we know about.
I often quote my Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, which historically many people know. And I see her actually as a sovereign, which will be a surprise to some people, men and women, because I think Margaret Thatcher was seen as a very dominant leader. But if you regard her in comparison to, say, Angela Merkel, if people know the Chancellor of Germany, again, very physically different. Angela Merkel was more, if you like, manly in her gait and even how she looked, but she was a very different. You could see her almost calculating in her head. She was a great collaborator, always engaged everybody. Whereas Margaret Thatcher was very singular and very focused on her way. Who's in my cabinet? Whereas Angela Merkel was saying, what are we doing in our cabinet? So if you look at the styles, this is not about strong characters. Everybody could be strong. And we could find, if we look at, politicians, female politicians, I don't want to look at the men, but the female politicians we have in the world, there are a variety of magicians and sovereigns. And what they're bringing to the political stage is this relational thinking, this circular thinking. But the subtle difference is that the magician will be saying, what are we going to do? And the sovereign will be saying, who's on my board? And so if we looked in business, it's quite difficult to find women, but somebody like Sarah Blakely, I don't know whether people know her, but she's quite a well-known businesswoman in America, very well. And I would say that she's got a lot of magician elements to her. She's very into ideas. And possibly Oprah Winfrey would be a sovereign. again, very intelligent, bright women. But you think about Oprah Winfrey's business, it's all about who. Who are you? Who's here? Whereas Sarah Blakely was definitely, she got an idea, saw that Spanx was it was picking up something that'd been there before, then going with it, and very her whole cultural essence in her business is people. So all women are focused on people, and the philosopher is very focused on people. The ruler is okay with people, but he is very focused on task. So when we acknowledge these characters, and you might look at it, let's look at it another way. I wonder if everybody listening knows Friends, the series, TV series.
They should. Well, I think if they're my age group, they should know it. Yeah.
There were 6 of them, weren't there?
Yeah. Yeah.
But I would say that the philosopher was Chandler.
Absolutely.
Chandler was the gentle guy. He found it challenging to be one of the boys. He just wanted to be, but he couldn't work out how to do that. Phoebe was the sovereign, who was always, that gentle soul. Monica was the magician, because she was a bit hard-nosed on occasion, but always with ideas. And Joey was the ruler. So Joey was a very expressive, masculine male. And then you had these 2 other characters, Ross and Rachel. And Ross was a very curious in-between sort of person. Occasionally he wanted to be a ruler, occasionally he wanted to be a philosopher. And Rachel was the same. She was tough sometimes and then very soft the other time. So it was almost like it was playing out the script. And of course, there are variations around this. And the goal is not to be tied to an archetype, but to allow the archetype to get you into the conversation of when, why, who, what. Because what you're looking at is the conversation in the middle.
The most interesting...
If you put leadership as the conversation, and you ask these characters, what does leadership look like to you? And you ask them for their role models, you would find some fascinating correlations between the archetypes and their desired leader. So I think that leadership is evolving. It's very personal, and it's perceptions and perspectives which come into it. And at the end of the day, remember, it's about non-toxic behavior.
I don't want you to miss out on this topic. Yeah, I see you closing off, but I want to bring it back to, because there's a lot of insight you've added with just the characters. I was very surprised about Phoebe being a sovereign, because we expect a little bit of some negative traits when it comes to sovereign. There are positives, of course, very strong positive.
Well, they've all got positive and negatives.
Absolutely. My question is, there tends to be, maybe always is not the right word, there tends to be a conflict at times between the women, because we do not know the archetype. And I think you make a very good point of saying we are all about people, because we always walk away from discussions or incidences and everything else, where we say we need to stand up together as women. We need to support each other. But it's in that translation of what that means. And I think when you defined to me what a magician is, where she says what, whereas the other one says who, it sort of almost indicates that there will be a conflict in terms of what we mean when we say we need to support each other. What are your experiences when it comes to women being in conflict because of that, not understanding the archetypal kind of discussions?
Well, I think that's a really, really poignant point. This is really, really important. And in my experience over 30 years, when I've presented to an audience of women, and I get to the point of talking about women don't always get on with each other, I find 5% of the audience are nodding and the others are avoiding me. So I believe, when I think about this, and I've thought about it a lot, when women get on with each other, we really are bonded. We are soul sisters. And, our girlfriends are our greatest allies. And I think we bond at a heart level, because But I say to people, like 95% of us is that bonding. It's 5% which is the sovereign and the magician. And the reason that we've got into conflict, I think, is because we've entered the masculine business world and we've taken on a lot of the traits of what men have desired. And this is no criticism of men, but the idea of being highly competitive, the idea of being aggressive, the idea of being, I'm better than you, the idea of, knocking the person behind you off the ladder because you're the only one, we're breaking the glass ceiling and all this stuff. Actually, there's room for everybody when we start looking at this broader map. And that's what my desire is. Because actually, when magician and sovereign work together, they are an amazing, amazing combination because they mix masculine and feminine within the female body. You make sense? It's actually, it functions. It's the same with men. When the ruler and the philosopher understand each other, they're complementary. They're fantastic partnership in business. Same with women. I've worked with, I know that as I become more aware, I know to listen to that gentle softness, that nurturing that will come from the sovereign. And one of the things when women don't get on, I have heard said that the sovereign will think the magician is not emotional enough to be a woman. We are competitive in a way about our emotional status. And I think that has actually come from the centuries and centuries of the business world saying, you can't bring that soft stuff in here. You can't bring that emotional stuff in here. Now we've got a turnaround on that because we're now seeing with wise business leaders, male and female, that emotional intelligence is important. It's not crying in the workplace. It's actually you're using this fuel for creativity and innovation and sensitivity and intuition. And the sooner those become positive business attributes, the greater will be our capacity to be all on this map together. So my pledge to women is to, remember we are not the same as men. We are a very valuable part of the equation. We're not all the same as each other. And let's use our strengths. And I think where very often women say, oh, well, I am masculine, when they're not actually a magician, is because they're very intelligent and they're being very businesslike. So being intelligent and business focused is not masculine. It's just being business focused and intelligent. So I think, one of the things that I really want to do is to educate the young adults, obviously right now the kids, but young adults now who are facing a world of craziness. And what are we going to do? And how am I going to be employed or be an employer? What am I going to do? We need to help them understand to maximize all the skills around them. Because, having children, having a family is going to be a priority at some point in people's lives or not. That's okay too. But let's not, delineate people out of the business equation because of that. And actually make sure that, if I want to grow a business, I actually want all of these characteristics.
Absolutely.
I want the ruler decisions. I want the philosopher making wise. I want the sovereign who's going to be really focused on my well-being and my heart and soul. And I really need the magician who's going to go off and spark in different places. And the essence of it all is to be in a conversation without judgment.
Absolutely. Tell me, in your experience and on the various conversations you are having, is there a shift really from rulers in terms of understanding what is happening globally and where there actually is a need to change the style of just hardcore telling, directing, and being more in cohesion with everyone else?
Well, I think one of the word that comes up for me is to be situational. Now, that might be a surprise to you. But I had this recently talking to a philosopher, and he's a military man as well. And he said, when you have a national emergency, there's a hurricane, there's you need the very sharp, decisive ruler. You also need the caring, sensitive. But when the water is coming over the horizon and you have to run for it, you need the person who says, go this way.
Yeah.
So I think it's really understanding in every situation, if we see these 4 quadrants as part of every situation, then the wise leader, and he could be, or she could be any of these, they understand how the situation is. Is the situation emergency? Is it temporary? Is it long term? Is it needing, what does the situation need? If we look at the world and we say we'd like to stop everything that's not good, that would be a wise move. What do we want to start? Because we can be very great at stopping everything or spending a lot of time stopping things. But if we don't have something to replace it with, we're going to keep on just stopping. And we know psychologically when we say, like, stop the violence against women and girls, we're focused on the violence against women and girls. And yes, we need to do that. But what's really good with the positive masculinity movement, which actually was started in DRC Congo with 6 nations, including South Africa, that the men were saying, actually, we need to train our young men to see the world differently. And that's the path that they're taking. And that is a very good starting point. We need to also be with the girls and say, this is what your role is too. It's not to go fight for equality and that, but it is to stand up and be absolutely the amazing person you are, and to expect to have that fulfilled as you go forward. So this is going to take time, but I think we have a point in the world where we need to look at this fairly urgently, because everything is changing so fast. So the situational is immediate in your daily life, but it's also long-term in terms of your business, where you're taking it, where's the country going. So if we look at globally, I think one of the words that comes back to me is this: do we need to control everything? Can we look at how to flow?
Tell me, and in terms of your messaging, I think one of the discussions we've always had is, Dr. P, I struggle. I struggle a little bit. I see your message, and you're right. I always say it's situational. It depends on the men that are ready to hear it and to take action on it. Do you think the same message can be shared and understood in the same token in the US and in Africa and in India, with the different cultural backgrounds and exactly where it's at? Because I don't think that anyone necessarily would vie for fighting for it. The fact that there's been a fight is because there's been an extremism in the masculine role. There's been an extremism and a sort of suffocating everyone else and saying that I am, and therefore everyone is under, and so on. Do you think now at this point in time the same message would be received the same way in the different cultures of the world? And because I sit in South Africa and I look at the challenges that we experience, and I like the cultural issues, the layers and layers and layers and layers. And I'm thinking in terms of receptivity. US.
Yes, I think it's one of the things that really, is something I'm both challenged by and seek it as an opportunity. If we try and solve a big problem, we could say there are lots of big problems, but if we try and solve problems, sometimes we miss the opportunities. One of the reasons I designed it this way is that it's neutral to the kind of diversities that cause arguments. So, sexual preferences, race, generation, because it's inviting people to have the conversation when they know the perspective they're looking at. So I think that it's the same as, like, people say, there's this big argument about, who is a woman and men and women and everything. But if you look around the world, as far as I understand, every nation has babies the same way. So there's some very sort of simple, basic facts. Now, obviously, religion is another thing that will come into play. But what I believe we need is to get to a baseline where we can have a conversation about something extremely tricky, but without judgment. And that's really where the challenge is. So if you consider the conversations that are not being had are usually based sort of at the top of the pyramid where, but our race is better or our religion is better. This is the only way, men should be this, or, when we start doing that, we cease to find a way to change. So fundamentally, I believe in human nature, that we're born, we breathe, we have a heart and soul, whatever, it doesn't matter about your religion. I work with a school in Kuala Lumpur, which has Muslim kids, Buddhist kids, and Hindu kids. And in the morning, the head principal will say to the kids, just close your eyes and pray to your God. It's like, be the human being and then relate to your situation. We won't solve all the difficult divisions in the world, but if we get to some sense of, do we want a toxic world or a non-toxic world? Who's in the room? Where are we going with this? If somebody says something that we don't like, instead of pouncing at it or retracting, say, well, that's an interesting perspective. Full stop. We're not saying yes or no. We're allowing ourselves as human beings to be in the situation we're in. Now, obviously, some situations are extremely dangerous, but one of the other ways to look at this is nature. Nature is very nature. It's natural. It's productive. It survives through all sorts of things, and it's very, in many ways, binary. It's yin and yang. It grows the way it does. Animals procreate. There are some species that create themselves, but generally we have this template around us which is fairly straightforward. I believe in where we are at the moment, especially with AI and robotic interventions coming in. We've got to really hold on to our humanity, and that's where my prayer is that if I'm sitting in an African tribe or I'm in a corporate entity in the US or an association in England, my first measure is to say, and you have personal experiences, this is a conversation without judgment. We're sharing views, and we may or may not agree, but we're not going to be angry, and we're not going to pounce on anybody. We're just going to start growing and seeding something that will relate to our situation. It may work and it may not work, but unless we try it, we will never know.
Absolutely beautiful. So tell me, how are you sharing the message right now? I think a year ago, 2 years ago, you started the Wisdom Circles. How impactful have they been? And I know now that you are into the corporate space. How is the information flowing, and how effective are the conversations?
It's starting to ripple out. So we have wisdom circles now in 14 different countries, run with my G100 positive masculinity chairs, like yourself in South Africa. Those conversations may not be vast yet, but we're starting to see very similar things. People want to stop the bad, start the good. In a way, it's simple. We've got men and women coming into some of the circles. Some of the circles are only female, but we're looking at gathering that data. And in terms of the corporate world, I'm starting to work with advisory boards and, to be honest, with many rulers, because when you get a wise ruler from this map who has been a controller of a business, that's where you open the window of opportunity. And of course, I do work with women's groups and women's entity, and I do lots of wonderful interviews like this one. But it's fascinating how it's rippling. And I go back to the main key is that when you talk to people about authentic harmony, they want to go towards it. So I'm working with my newsletter on LinkedIn, my posts on LinkedIn, I'm starting to get a very interesting response from people say, yeah, we'd like that kind of world. So I really am addressing men. And I wanted to share is that I think in life we always have all the jewels in our own backyard. Have you ever discovered that? And I recently posted out about some research that I did in 2010 in England and 2018 in America, which was actually global because that was online. But it was asking men how men think most men think. And it was really interesting because all the men said, I'm so glad you asked me.
Wow.
So I appeal to men out there, men often feel they've been left out of this equation because of the feminist movement, the Me Too movement, women empowerment. So I say women empower men, take the T off the end. So in this research, what the research said, and it got good reviews recently, the men said, paraphrasing, I really want to be different and softer, but I just got all this work to do, so I go back to being a tough guy. I really want to work with women. It was that kind of push-pull. And I think that this is the moment where we can unleash that. It's not saying to men, oh, you've got to be soft and cry in the office, but it's saying, allow yourself to be human and open up the doors. And then for women to be totally who they are, not trying to be men. We're very intelligent, very good business women. Any woman who wants to run a business is really good at it. And some women don't want to run businesses, and that's good as well. Some women can be the home mother. That's great too, but make it acceptable. So I think that the responses I'm getting, and I'm making a plan to go towards the male rulers, and that's starting to work now. Interesting enough, because of our global community, it's happening everywhere at once. So there's a good interest in Dubai, in Africa, Ghana. We're working with there's new interest in obviously DRC Congo. And my restriction there is I don't speak French, but the commitment to change is popping up everywhere, and that's why I think we need to garner it now. And we actually do have a World Wisdom Circle every second Wednesday of the month. And everybody who's actually interested and willing and wanting to be engaged, then we really hope you'll come. We need to spread this word. My dream is that my company is Corporate Heart International. My dream is that companies will take on a corporate heart. And when they do that, everybody who works for them will enjoy working there. There'll be a natural diversity. There'll be, you don't need policy to run the place. And the last issue is that the ruler or the philosopher or the magician or someone, whoever runs that company, will tell the world about it.
I don't want to cut you off, but you raised a very valid point that I don't want to lose. You said a ruler says, I want to have a heart, but it gets busy. What is the actual return on investment on getting the leadership code right? Because I think with rulers, you said it's rands and cents, it's factual, it's it's boom, boom, boom. So if for me, there's no return on investment in the kumbaya circle and bringing everyone's input. What are you finding that we are defining now as the return on investing in this type of work?
Absolutely. It's absolutely a return on investment in productivity and performance. Absolutely. And also what you're doing is you're getting rid of the cost of damage. So you're getting rid of the cost of harassment cases, the cost of your own tension and stress. So on an individual basis, the leader will find that his or her life is easier, but it's also more productive. And actually there's been data out forever since the last 30 years of women coming into business. There's lots of data around, there's higher shareholder value, there's higher creativity, there's higher return. And so the equation is solid. The change process may not be immediate, but it can start immediately. And I think you had that occasion when you had a program and you invited men to share, where the gentleman involved said, this is easier than policy. I think it's allowing a past-focused, past mind to recognize that actually this is a productive part of the business equation. It's almost like you could put it on the P&L. So it's about talking the language of business and layering in the value of people who happen to be men and women who are these archetypes. So if you look at these 4 archetypes, the value add is, if the ruler is the activist doing things, he needs the theorist, he needs the reflector, he needs the pragmatist. He needs to know who those are. As that's the key. And I found in my work with clients, what they say is it lasts. So like what we do is not training, it's facilitating experiences where people come out the end and go, wow, I didn't know my life could be like this. And that's incredibly valuable. And again, it's a lesson in terms of agility in business to know that, measurements don't need to be the old ones that Henry Ford used when he was creating the factory. That was then, and that was good. But now we're going to have to add in intuition. We're going to have to add in robotic AI, emotional intelligence. We need to be proactive in adding those things in at the beginning.
Tell me, how do you think the COVID-19 era actually helped in accelerating all of these conversations? Because we were thrown off the wheel, overnight to the phase of COVID. And it introduced exactly the same kind of attributes that we're looking for, that were not on the template of organizations. We needed to care for people, the well-being, the mental health, things that came out of that phase, which are not or were not in the policies, but have become kind of big words. How do you think COVID-19 actually, threw a spanner in the works and made us realize that you need both kind of attributes, the female energy as well as the male energy within a work context? Because no one had rules. We needed to help people struggle with personal issues, and you couldn't use the rules of like command and control, or you couldn't have people in front of you, but you had to trust. All these female energies, trust, care,
Yes.
nurture. What are the jewels that we actually got out of COVID?
Well, I think exactly that. What's really interesting when you look back, for me personally, the first year of 2020 was such a shock. I think it was just a shock. And it's almost like when you get a diagnosis and you've got to deal with it. But then people started really caring about each other, which was really good side. And now sadly, I think we've gone into a slightly less caring way because of economic crisis, and everybody going, oh my God, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? Food's going to run out. We start panicking. So our challenge is to stop in a state of panic and do what we need to do, which is, I suppose the classic is the mask on the airline. That everybody who's been on an aircraft know the trick. You've got to put the mask on yourself first before you help somebody else. And I think the raging mental health agenda is all symptomatic of where we've kind of come out of COVID and we've forgotten the lessons. And I think we need to remember those lessons of care. So, what is the value of care and what is the cost of care? That's what maybe the corporate leader is looking at. And you just have to work on an equation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In my experience, I don't try to persuade somebody who's, dare I say, borderline narcissistic, I'm going to do it my way or the highway, prove this to me. I'm going to say no. I want the willing person who's willing to step into that, because you can't become emotionally aware unless you take responsibility for yourself. And there are a lot of characters out there doing the right things. And my goal at the moment is to find those people and ask them to share it on a major stage. And that's one of the things, is to get the message out in a constructive way. What you've got to remember, and this is really important, is that men are very either or, and women are very and. So when we say, put intuition on the bottom line, you no doubt get a man who say, what? Oh, I can't do that because I never have. You have to come at it a different way.
Yeah.
And add the value in. I always talk about value. What is the value we add in a constructive way? So there's the cost side and there's a value side. And there's a Covey program about trust, that when trust is high, costs are low. When trust is low, costs are high. Wow. So if employees don't trust people, if employees don't trust each other or the boss, you'll get more harassment cases, you'll get more sickness, you'll get more absence. When they trust, costs disappear. And to be honest, you don't need a DEI policy. If you've got real trust, real engagement, real willingness to be in this together, to use my values, whether I'm a male or female, whatever archetype, you will have low costs and you'll have higher returns. And that's a fact.
Dr. P, if someone is looking to have these conversations within their corporate, how do they reach you?
Well, the best way to reach me is either through LinkedIn, Pauline Crawford, Dr. Pauline Crawford, the conversation game changer. I want to change all the conversations in the world to positive. Or else my website, which is Corporate Heart International, and you can find me there. And of course, but if you want to find more about the power of authentic harmony, then my book is available on Amazon, but it's also available as an ebook on my website. And that will give you some starting points of how we might change our conversations to add value. And then my next book, which will be coming out hopefully this year, will be more in-depth detail about the archetypes. And I want to share something which I hopefully makes this relevant, that I do use some AI support to write scripts for my archetypes. I've just discovered this recently. And I tell you what, it's fabulous. And you might say, well, is that sort of making things up? No, these archetypes have some very fundamental behavioral traits in it. We've been around ever since Carl Jung started looking at behavioral continuums. So it's kind of a logical thing where if you've got these characteristics, certain things will happen if you don't get interested in other people. And so you can write a scenario to solve a problem and then just practice it. So I believe that will be a very good asset for a ruler. I'm going to try that out next year.
Wow, that is amazing. Dr. P, it's always a pleasure to chat to you. And I love that you always have the next challenge. You never get stuck. You're always about continuity, adapting, and rebranding, which is how life functions, I guess. There's always continuity. It's such a pleasure to have you on board. And I'm looking forward to inviting you to the next season to see how far you've come, what are the next adventures that you are looking at getting into. And to our listeners, you've heard there's so much that you can gain from Dr. Pauline. She's a writer. She's got Wisdom Settles that happen every second week. And she has also an organization called Corporate Heart, where she can engage organizations who want to start having these change-making conversations. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you so much for your time. I love your enthusiasm and your ability to take these ideas on, and that I can serve you. That's my pleasure. And we will have a Crack the Code open program for sale every month. The next one's on the 29th of July. So there's lots that we can do in the world together. And that's the thing, harmony.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all our listeners. There you have it. You can follow Dr. Pauline. She's on LinkedIn. She's quite active, almost daily writing blogs of her perspectives, and she's active in podcasts. She is also active in her role as the Rotary president, and she's also pushing the agenda of also
Rotary.
Yeah, the Rotary.
Yes.
And she's also there, also talking about the same message of positive masculinity. Thank you very much for listening.